Morning.
Good morning. Okay, so let's jump right into it. I want to jump into this with a hypothetical. Okay. You get an email from an old friend in college or somebody you've known many years ago who writes and says, "Dear Barbara, dear Linda, dear John and Fred, dear John and Dixie, it's so good to reach out to you. I haven't seen you in so long. Guess what? I'm coming to Boston. And I would love not only to see you, but I would love to stay with you. Any chance that I could, you could just host me for a couple, 3 nights next week. And if you can, I'll email you my food sensitivities. I can't eat gluten, etc. And it will be so wonderful to catch up. All the best. Looking forward to seeing you soon." Now, if you were to get this email from an old friend that you haven't seen in years, but that you really knew, and now they're going to be in town, I would just love to see by a show of hands on this screen, how many of you would welcome that email and would be enthusiastic about hosting your old friend? Oh my God, this is a class of Mother Teresa's. All of you would. Okay. Let me just hear some thinking on that. Selig and Barbara, what's your thinking on that?
Some of my old friends, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Selig and Barbara Adler, and then Barbara will get you next.
No, they're two Barbaras.
Yes.
Both of us, but I get the Selig, who said, "Barbara, you talk." I'm happy to see my old friends. You know,
And
if I can
happy to
do
host
it,
them.
I will do it. That does not mean, incidentally, that they could move in for 3 months.
No, but for 3 days, 2-3
3
days.
days, I can do anything.
And Barbara, let me ask you this question. Does the fact that we're still in this surreal COVID season affect your analysis?
I would hope that my friends are careful. And I would ask before they came about being careful. And if they were not careful to the level that, or vaccinated, I would have to say no. That is part of it.
If they reached out and said, "By the way, we're fully vaccinated, I just got my booster shot, et cetera, you would let them in?
I think I would.
Okay.
I think too much we're getting into the protected castle, drop the moat mentality.
Okay. Barbara Resnick, what's your
No,
thing?
I agree with her. I just didn't know that there was another Barbara. I'm sorry.
No, okay, you would, and Barbara, what would inspire you and Frank to open up your home?
Well, I'm not sure Frank as much as me, but for the people that I know that would do that would be people I would really like to see. And we're very fortunate. We have enough space that they wouldn't be on top of us. And I would love to show them the town. I've always loved to show people Boston. And I've had even children of friends come stay with me.
Okay. Let me ask you this question, class. For any of you, is home hospitality a harder mitzvah? Like, you're not actually loving that. Is anyone here on the call who struggles with home hospitality? Is there anyone here who would not particularly love this email because now it's awkward and you know you're supposed to say yes and you know you're supposed to do it, but oh my God, I don't really want to do it. Anyone want to speak that voice, if anyone? Alice Bressman.
So you qualified it. You said friends. If friends were coming, there are people I've gotten calls from I would rather not put up. But as you say, it's kind of the right thing to do. So in the reality of life, if it's friends, then they wouldn't be friends if you didn't want to put them up.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
And I would say, since you then went on to qualify it with COVID, we have very strict COVID rules in my entire extended family, even my children. So no, I would not put them up in my home during COVID. But in your second question, you qualified the first with friends.
Okay, so in other words, Alice, just so I understand you, I write you to say, I'm an old time friend of yours. I've known you for years, but it's been years since we've seen each other. And I write and say to you, I'm super glot kosher when it comes to COVID. I've got my booster, super cautious, and I'm coming to Boston. Can I stay with you? But in COVID, while ordinarily in non-COVID times, you would say yes, during COVID, even for somebody who's careful, you would not want to include them and have them in your house.
That's correct. And wait, if they're my good friends, they get it. Because I don't meet people in restaurants. I do not have anyone in my home currently.
Okay.
So people get it. I say, this is our family rule.
Okay. Got it. Got it. So it's an interesting question. We're going to see, because our Torah reading this week begins with this mitzvah. It's historic, it's important, and it encounters COVID in interesting ways and raises interesting questions. Dottie, your hand was up.
Hi, I'm hosting a Zoom class, so I really can't talk. Just tell me quickly what the deal is.
Joan, if you could turn off your thing. Okay, Dottie, if you could unmute.
Okay, I'll tell the rabbi.
Dottie, did you want to say
Rabbi
something?
Gardenswartz, yeah.
Joan?
Yes.
Okay,
Can
and
you
I'll
hear
get
me
back to
now?
you. Sure. Okay.
Yes.
Bye.
My only comment on this is friends are friends. And aside from the COVID, that's my family wouldn't even come near my doors. I understand all that, but after reading this chapter, and I have 3 sons, but those build a higher, I think that would give me the lesson of a lifetime. That was the most undisciplined, disgusting manner in which I have ever, in my few years, seen people act with parents who they themselves didn't seem to object that much. The parents, that was gross. That really was. And if you had one experience like that, I think you'd sell your house and go to a hotel, or tell your friends who are coming into Boston, go to a hotel.
Right, thank you, Dottie. So you're adverting, of course, to chapter 8 of the Netanyahus, which we're going to get to in the fullness of time. But and in this chapter, of course, the visitors, Ben Sion and Sila and their 3 kids, as portrayed, this is fiction, as you know, are very challenging guests. I think, Dottie, your phrase was Vildachayas. So I want to deal with that issue too. So we have a bunch of issues going on, and I want to start with the Torah portion, and then bring in a little Talmud, and then we'll talk about this chapter and life and this complex mitzvah. So Joan, if you can please screen share the first 2 pages. Okay, so this is from our reading this week. The Lord, this is Vayera. You'll come on Shabbos. It's David Rosenberg's bar mitzvah. It's the Cantor's son, Cantor and Lorena. Hope you'll be here and you'll get a lot of nachas. And when you are, we'll see this. The Lord appeared to him, Abraham, by the terebinths of Mamre. Now, Abraham, just at the end of last week's reading, circumcises himself. He's 99 years old. Okay, so he circumcised himself at 99. And so he is, according to tradition, he is sick. He's a choleh. He's ill because he just had surgery. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Now, the way the rabbis are going to interpret this, that Abraham was sick. He was recovering from his procedure, the circumcision. It was hot. But in that context where he was, in a vulnerable place, God appears to him. Vayera is the name of the portion, and that means appeared. And God, and the one that appears as God. God appeared to him. So the rabbis see that Abraham is having a moment of intense communion with God. Then he's finally, he's having a moment. Imagine that you get a moment with God, okay? That God comes to pay you a bikur chol and masik visit. Looking up, he saw three men standing near him. So now he's got a conflict. What should he do? Should he continue with his moment with God? It is, after all, God. Or should he interrupt his moment? Should he stop the communion? Should he hang up on God? God, I gotta go. Sorry, God, I gotta go. Gotta run. Talk to you later, God. And deal with three total strangers. So John, if you can go to page 2, please. So we know what happens. As soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them, and bowing to the ground, he said, "My lords, if it please you, do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought, bathe your feet, recline under the tree. Let me fetch a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves, then go on. Seeing that you have come your servant's way," they replied, "Do as you have said." So imagine, let me put this in contemporary terms. Imagine that you just got your booster shot and you feel like hell. You just got your booster shot and you feel like hell. You got a little fever, you got chills, you got the way people sometimes feel like after their second shot, or okay? And it's just then, and you're kind of recovering and you're kind of finally feeling a little bit better. And then three strangers appear and you just spring out, you spring up, you spring into action, you start running around and you tell these three strangers who you do not know, "Stay here, let me get you something to eat, let me get you something to drink, let me wash your feet," etc., etc. Okay? This is Abraham embodying this Jewish value of hachnasat orchim. So Joni, if you'll go to the next page, please. This is what the Talmud is going to say. Go all the way down there, okay? Go all the way down, Joni, a little bit. Thank you, perfect, okay? Then it says, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Gedolah hachnasat orchim mehakablat pnei shechina. That hachnasat orchim, home hospitality, is a more important mitzvah than kabbalat pnei shechina. That's translated here as greeting the divine presence, or you could say having a moment with God or enjoying communion with God. In other words, being with people, including strangers, and giving them hospitality is more important than having a moment with God. And our father and the patriarch of our people, Avraham Avinu, role models this when he's having a tough day and he still springs into action. So so John, thank you. You can stop the screen share. And let me ask you first, what do you think of this teaching that Abraham, just in the course of a day, role models, open your home, feed the stranger, clothe the stranger, clean the stranger, give them to eat, give them to drink, give them to rest. What do you think about that teaching? Anyone? David Kovelman.
A couple of things. Well, one, it looks like Abraham did not keep kosher because he set out for milk and a calf.
Yes.
So that's number one.
But that's before Sinai.
Number two, I would not wash the feet of strangers, no matter what,
Right.
no matter how divine that would be. And number three, if I saw three strangers at my door, I would think they would say, "Where do you keep your valuables?" I would not be so hospitable to three strangers in this era, in this day and time of high crime rates and defunding the police. I think I'd not be a little less hospitable and more suspicious if I saw three strangers at my door.
Yeah, so David, let's talk about that, because I think, this teaching is, it's a classic Jewish teaching, home hospitality. It's so core, it's so Jewish, etc. I think even before we get to COVID and even before we get to the Netanyahus, I think that even in the best of times, it's a really hard it's a hard teaching. First of all, if they're really strangers, we're all very suspicious of strangers, and for good reason. I mean, I can't say this enough, and you all know this. I mean, we have somewhere between 2, 3, and 4 armed security guards at Temple Emmanuel every day because we're fearful of strangers, right? And we are as a community. I mean, unfortunately, tragically, I mean, it wasn't that way before Pittsburgh, but it is that way now. And if you ever have a conversation, can we try to save some money by cutting down on security? People go bananas. No, 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 no. We need armed. If anything, the energy is for more, not less, of the armed security guards. So, so that's one issue, which is just if they're strangers and we're, Abraham doesn't have suspicion. We do have suspicion. That's one issue. What other reactions are there? That if this feels like Abraham is a more innocent time, we're a less innocent time. Any other reactions to this before we even get to COVID and anti-Semitism and all that other complexity? Any other reactions? Tamar. If you can unmute, please, Tamar. And Tamar, I can't hear you yet. If you could please unmute. Now you're unmuted. Please.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we sure can.
Okay. I mean, you can't compare times to times. People are in the desert, ain't a lot of people around, you're not going to a mall, I can kind of see that more. But I'm a bigger believer in Ben Franklin, who said fishing companies stink after 3 days. How long are you staying? I mean, the Netanyahus have clearly gone to the place where they've overstayed their welcome.
Right.
So I don't know if anything's comparable in a world where we have photographs on our doorbells. I'm going to let you in. I'm going to welcome you. It's not the same as inviting someone for Shabbat or a holiday that that you've vetted. Stranger is stranger for just a word. Do you know what I mean?
Right. I think that's just so important to draw this out, that in the Bible, a stranger is a sign of somebody you want to welcome. And as you're saying, Tamar, and as David is saying, a stranger in our own world is somebody that you want to keep your distance from. And you need some security guards if you're going to really encounter. I also just want to say, now we can factor in also a little bit of COVID. There's the issues that Alice brought up about, the carefulness and the covenant you have with your family and your closest relatives, and what are your protocols that you're following, and how do you know where they've been, and how do you know they were on a plane, and how do you know? And so there's that issue. Then I think there's another issue that's really worth raising here. This is not about the Netanyahus, but it's just about life, which is, and it's worth naming, on this day in October of 2021, all of our social muscles have atrophied. Most of us have just been in our own little space with whoever it is that's in our home. We live alone or we live with our spouse, but we're not used to, and at most, we'll see somebody on Zoom for an hour, or at most we'll see somebody outside for an hour. But the notion of having somebody, even if they're not a stranger, even if there's somebody that, we knew in college, that they're going to be with us for a day, for 2 days, for 3 days. It's a little bit like asking you to run a marathon when you haven't been running a marathon, the kind of social muscles that requires. So I think that's another, like everybody has their own rhythms. Like I know when I wake up in the morning, the first half hour, I just want to make a cup of coffee and settle in and think and drink the coffee and have some silence. And the last thing I want is to have to make conversation with somebody who's a house guest. That feels like an intrusion for me, right? Everybody has the rhythms that are interrupted. So you've got all of that swimming around. You have privacy, you have stranger, you have COVID, and now, so what you have here is a paradox, which is this is a mitzvah that we're all supposed to do as Jews, and it's a mitzvah that, if we're honest, is actually very hard to do for a lot of us. For me, I always struggle with Achnasat Orchim. for all the reasons we mentioned, and just the fact that I like privacy, and and it's a tough mitzvah. Now we're ready to talk about chapter 8 of the Netanyahus, when Reuben Bloom and Edith are asked to host Ben Sion, and it turns out that they get not only Ben Sion but Sila, and not only Ben Sion and Sila, but also Yonatan, Binyamin, and Edo. So what are your reactions to chapter 8 and to what happens? And I would just love to canvass some general reactions before we get into the details. What did you guys think about it? Linda Leffert.
I thought that in a way, it was so outrageous that I think it really made it difficult to be sane about it. I mean, it's such an extreme situation, including taking the kid's diaper off on the dining room table with nothing to even wipe them with. That
Right.
I'm not sure, and I'd be interested to know your opinion or anyone else's opinion. What was the purpose of telling a story that makes this such an extreme example of,
Right, and I have that same question.
Company from hell. It's not even close. It's in fact, to me, when it's that extreme, it doesn't even encourage a lot of conversation, because anybody who had any idea that that would happen, no matter how good-hearted they were, I don't think, to me, I'm not a student of the Torah, or whatever, so I have to start with that. But from what was reading, I was thinking maybe it would be more like, would you take someone in from Haiti now?
Right.
Or would you take someone in from Afghanistan? Which would be harder, I guess, because it's not someone you know. But to me, that would be the closer, the kind of situation that I would have thought of in the Bible.
Right.
Somebody who's needy and on the road and whatever, would you help them? But if you believe that anyone like this, you might decide you never want to invite anyone into your house again.
Right. And so, Linda, I want to just say amen to the tone, tenor, and content of your comment. And I want to raise your question, which is, you ask about the extreme nature of what happens in chapter 8, that that the family is just so Vildachaya-ish, that the kids are Vildachayas, all this horrible details. And what is the point in a chapter where, in other words, the real issues with home hospitality, if you're not extreme, those real issues are relatable and textury, and anybody can relate to them, that you don't have privacy, and you have to always be on, and you have to entertain, and now you throw in COVID and we don't have social muscles anymore, and now you throw in COVID and who knows where you've been and is it safe, and you could just deal with the real stuff and get a real conversation going. Why then does Joshua Cohn give us such an extreme story? And I'll just add to that, in this middle section of the book, chapter 6 has the extreme conversation over Thanksgiving dinner. And chapter 7 has the extreme situation of Judy, the daughter, planning to have her face smashed in by her grandfather. That's all. And then there's extreme nightmares. It's just extreme. And now you have this extreme story of hospitality. And so I don't have the answer, but I would love to surface and reaffirm your question. What's the purpose of this extreme voice? So any takers on that, would love to hear. I'll take Tamar, and then I'll take Dottie, and then anyone else who wants to speak. Tamar.
Okay, so I'm thinking that it's kind of a metaphor. Not everyone who's of your belief system is by nature going to buy into everything. I mean, so not every Jewish person is like your Jewishness or what you perceive as Jewishness, and not every American is on the same plate. And look where we are now. We assume all Americans are X, and then we are brutally disrupted by this. We assume all Jews are X, but that's not so. That's just not so. We all have different, we're different. And so the stranger is truly like Camus, the stranger, it's the stranger you don't know. And just because someone is of your belief system or of your color or of your anything does not mean that they are instantly recognizable or sharing the same values as you.
Yeah, Tamara, thank you for that. And I think the observation you made about you don't really know the stranger is also true. You don't even know the members of your own family very often. Because we're mysteries even to the people closest to us. Because one of the themes of this, as the story evolves, is how deeply dysfunctional Reuben and Edith and Judy are. This core family, right? I mean, and sometimes it's subtle. Like Reuben is a professor. He writes his daughter's college application. That's kind of sick. Reuben is a professor. He does his daughter's homework and turns it in when she's hospitalized. That's kind of sick. Reuben and Judy are obviously estranged from one another. You know, he wants to cuddle with her at the end of the day and she pushes him away. There's just a lot of, not only are they strangers to strangers, but they're strangers to themselves. And you know, there's these vignettes like when Judy tells whoever comes to pick her up, and they say, "You're like your mother," and she says, "No, I'm not like my mother," and she's just cruel and hurtful, and they're cruel and hurtful to each other in the same way that there's you know, real challenge with the guests. So I think that theme that you don't really know, you're a stranger to strangers and you're a stranger to others. And it turns out in the end also we're strangers to ourselves. And we learned that as well in this chapter. So thank you, Tamar. Dottie, you had your hand was up.
What my first question in this last chapter, when they came to visit, was, is there snow in Israel? Does it ever snow? And the lack of a respect to walk into a home where you've never really met the people or know them, flapping across with your muddy shoes, and the lady of the house has to ask them to take their shoes off. This is it's not a matter of culture, but it's the lack of respect for everything around you. I mean, I would hate to think that anybody that I know or you know would do such a thing, and all the running around and everything they did. Is this not something that's it's innate? It should be within yourself that the parents would know. And also the father smashing up the car, and he asks Rube to get him a good mechanic because he claims there was something wrong with the mechanical part of the car, not the fact that he was speeding and went off the road and smashed it up.
Right. So I want to ask about that too, because you know, some part of this we know is true. In other words, Ben-Zion Netanyahu did spend 20 years on the Iberian persecutions, 15th century Spain and Portugal, and his position that, you know, it all connects to the Holocaust. That's true. 1492 is 1942. That's true. That's his thing, right? But one of the questions that I had, and I just don't know the answer, but it's an important question, is the grossness that Joshua Cohn describes in these chapters. The fact that Ben-Zion and Sila, you know, raise these Vilda Chaya kids and are such horrible guests, and what you were mentioning, Dottie, that Ben-Zion asks Reuben to lie for him, that Ben-Zion gets the car from this guy in Dropsy College and then blames this guy for the car. All that stuff is just very unbecoming. And if it's not true, if that's just a fictional account, then I have a problem with that, because you're really kind of sliming, you know, you're sliming somebody who's dead to convey Ben-Sion's words in his text is one thing, but to have him say to his host, I want you to lie for me, that's, if that's not true, that's extremely disturbing. So Annette, I'll love your voice, and then Barbara Resnick, and then anyone else who would love to speak. Annette Needle. And then please unmute.
Oh, I thought okay.
Yeah.
I typically do not enjoy reading this kind of literature. I'm reading it because it was an assignment. The outrageousness is believed by many as depicting we as Jews. We lie, we misrepresent, we're not good guests in the Middle East or in other places, and I could go on. And so I find it very, very painful to have had this written, for us to be reading it, and for it to be read and believed, because we know what happens with fake information.
Yeah. Yes, I hear that, I feel that. How do you put, so I guess I want to pause for a second in the conversation, because the first several chapters were idea chapters that went to the heart of how do we understand Zionism? How do we understand American exceptionalism, the American Jewish experience? Is it, do you believe his elementary school teachers that America is just the best country ever and we're not perfect, but we're getting better and better? Or do you believe his Hebrew school teachers that, America is another Mitzrayim? All those questions, and then his reading of Ben-Sion and the two letters, the one that was pro and the one from Peretz Rabbi, that had all those cautionaries. All those idea chapters were really rich and evocative. And then you have these middle chapters that are obscene burlesques. So Annette, how would you put that together?
What I feel, and I haven't thought a lot about it, is that you set the stage for us being in Israel, you set the stage for us being in the United States, America, and then you show, then he shows how we really treat those things. So yes, on the one hand, you can have the love of Zionism, but then look what we do with the Middle East. Look what we did with the people who lived there before us. Look at how we treat our neighbors now. And so I feel like it was a setup for what life is truly like.
And then let me ask you this question. The fact that the man wrote it is named Joshua Cohen. Let's say if it were written by a non-Jew, or let's say if it were written by a Palestinian or an Arab scholar, or Edward Said wrote this, the late professor at Columbia, would you have, how would that affect how you take it in? How does the fact that it's written by an American Jew versus written by a Palestinian affect how you take this in?
Well, I'd have to give it more thought, but I think it would be the outside saying what we're like instead of the inside saying what we're like.
Okay, Barbara Resnick and then Connie Gieser.
I have a different take on it finally.
Please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
In fact, we just had a guest come in. That's why I had to take a leave. And I also have to tell you, my name Barbara means stranger barbarian. And I think, why would a mother name a child a stranger barbarian? So I'm very sensitive about the subject. But I do think it's a total satire. I do wonder what non-Jews would think. But it's an absolute satire, as if, when you get a little further, he wants us to be what we really are, but we can't be because of society. And I just think it's done for that reason, because he wants to show it has to do with politics too, and Netanyahu, how he's disliked and how he arrived where he did to a great degree, following his father's thing. But so I don't take it seriously, but I do agree that it would be funny if it was read by the wrong people.
So Barbara, that's such an interesting and helpful thought. I want to pause on that one. First of all, I'm loving this conversation because I actually don't have any of the answers to all these questions, and we're reasoning it ourselves through it together. you suggest, so the question is, what do we make of the obscene burlesque in chapter 6, 7, and 8? The Thanksgiving meal that almost ends in a fight between a grandfather and granddaughter,
It's so
which is a
insane.
premonition of the grandfather smashing in her face. The really weird dream that the father has, that, you know, and then the visit from hell. And, you know, Annette raises the concern that it's very unflattering and maybe people are going to think this is the way we actually are. And Barbara, you raised that this is satire, that genre matters. I remember Mark Brettler, you know, the great Bible scholar. Oh, he was talking about, I once heard a lecture of Mark Brettler, who was at Brandeis. I think now he's at Duke. But he was giving a class on Genesis 1 and 2. And he writes on the board 2 words that I heard this lecture 20 years ago. I still remember it. Genre, G-E-N-R-E, genre matters. And Mark Brettler writes that if you get home and the mail comes and it says emergency, open now, it's urgent, open now, that you already know that genre matters, because if it were really urgent, we'd all have heart attacks, because every day we come home to the mail and there's something you got to open now. But genre matters. We know that this is mail, so therefore we know it's not really an emergency. And if that's the case, Barbara, then it's satire. Genre matters. He's not really saying that we're like this. But my question to you is, can an author shift the tone in the middle of a book? Because the first 5 chapters are not satire. The first 5 chapters are idea encounters. He's pitting one idea against another idea. He's pitting Herzl against Jabotinsky. He's pitting the religious school teachers who say America is Egypt with the days, you know, with the elementary school teachers who say America is an exception. And then how does it work when you go from an idea encounter to satire? Any thoughts, Barbara? And then Connie, you're up next.
I'm not that deep, but because I can't remember that exactly when I was reading it, except to say it was funny and it shouldn't be funny. I mean, but the other thing is the nose situation. I almost didn't realize that she wanted the grandfather to slam the door, because the whole concept of a nose job when we were growing up, and you disguised it as needing a really, but a lot of Jews felt they had bad noses. And, you know, he's making this, it's just a satire on this girl's achieving it through a bizarre way.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's what, but I think he wants us to look at things and see it differently too. But I do think that it is gross if you want to know the truth, and it's complicated, but I
Yeah.
think it's all satire.
Thank you, Connie.
Well, I think what he's trying to do is to point out to us how we look at each other as Jews in the diaspora and growing up in different cultures, and how hard it is for us to truly understand each other, our different points of view, whether he's pointing it out in an absurd way, or whether he's pointing it out in an intellectual way. But I think that that is the purpose. And I wondered if you took these 2 families out of where they were and put them in a neutral location, would they have the same problems, or would they be able to meet and understand each other and develop a relationship? So culture and how they grew up affected them and us.
Yeah, I want to double click on that point, and I want to make this very personal for everyone on the call, which is, if you think about the different generations of you and your loved ones, whether it's you and your parents and grandparents, whether it's you and your children and grandchildren, but how a different generation of experience shapes things. And I think as a reader, you have some work to do here, at least I do, to kind of get the truth and the core that's really legitimate and meaty from all the burlesque and all this, the stuff that was gross. But at the core is this real issue of different generations shape things. So I want to go to the Thanksgiving meal. You know, we're a month away from Thanksgiving. And this is the conversation. Look on page 101. And I'm going to just read this.
I'll call you tonight.
Okay. And if everyone can please be on mute if you're not speaking. Okay. I'm going to read this. And this is between the grandfather, Alter, who's a survivor type from Europe, and granddaughter Judy. Okay. Someone, page 101, penultimate paragraph. Someone who does only what he believes, my father said. What do you think that life is like? What to call someone who he follows that behavior? And notice even the way he speaks is his elocution is the elocution of an immigrant to America. Judy said, honest, a hero, dead, I call him dead. That's so cynical. My father flicked his spoon at her. If I was trying to go to college, I would tell the bosses of the college not what I thought, but what I thought they wanted to hear. I would look at them and know what to say to them. And from that, I would be picked by them and everyone would get what they wanted. They, the opinions, and me, the college. That is my advice. And it is the best advice, even though the man who gives it never went to school in this country in his life. Here I worked, and in Kiev, I went to Cheder. You know what is Cheder, etc. Then he writes, I didn't have a proper education, but I'm not a putz, because instead I had my life where I learned that fairness is just an idea. Like the Soviets have an idea which doesn't work. It goes against nature. But Zaidi, that's the point. It's more like a principle. Fairness is something we have to live up to. We're supposed to overcome the herd, urges, and nepotistic tribal ties in this country and learn to live together equally, judging others with an open mind and knowing that helping those who are different from us will actually help us too. You think that's true? I've been in factories, I've been in unions, I've been kicked in the ear on both sides of the picket line, but I've never seen it. Maybe you have to open your eyes. So this conversation between, a grandfather from the Pale settlement and this granddaughter who grows up here, what was your reaction to that? She who says fairness is real and we have to work together. He who says fairness is chimerical and stick to your tribe. What did you think of that Thanksgiving colloquy? Anyone? Please, Tamar. And also, if you've been trying to reach me and I haven't called on you, please send me that you want to speak in the chat and I'll be delighted to call on you. Tamar. And Tamar, you're on mute.
Mute.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I think for many of us, we grew up where this was the golden Medina, and what could be wrong? I think for me, I worked for CJP when I came out of college, and I ran the Yom HaShoah event. My dad was a survivor. And what was eye-opening to me was how truly unmonolithic we were in approaching this. The Polish Jews had a different view than the Lithuanian Jews and the Estonian Jews. And I think for the outside world, we appear as a monolith, which is not true. We are not a monolith. And even from way inside, when I saw this, I was like, wow, stunned that my people, could feel so differently about the same issue. And then I had a question for you going back to the first session. You showed a portion where it said, it had a timeline and the Jews were expelled and the Jews were expelled. And well, if they disliked us so much, why were we expelled instead of killed? I mean, why the expulsion, which is wholly different than killing? An expulsion says something else. And is that something else that they felt contributed in some way to who we are? We weren't necessarily all wiped up in Holocaust in those ages. We were expelled. And what becomes of people who are expelled, do they band together as one? Do they still get to take their separateness as, like I'm Lithuanian, I'm Russian, I'm this, I'm that, I'm whatever, and go with it, or they have to buy into the whole?
Mm. Yeah, so on the first point that you made, Tamar, I mean, you talk about not monolithic as between Polish Jews and Estonian Jews and Lithuanian Jews. So there's not monolithic there. And of course, we're not monolithic anywhere, as between America and Israel, as between America, as between Temple Emmanuel. You come to Kiddush, and if there's 200 people, there's 201 opinions on any issue. But what this story illustrates is that the non-monolithic quality obtains not only with regards to Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania and Polish, but even within the same family, non-monolithic. Even within the same family, that the grandfather and the granddaughter can literally barely speak the same language and just have such radically different views. By the way, this is just so obviously and painfully true today with regards to Israel, especially whenever there's a war like there was in May. The conflicting views of grandparents and grandchildren, I'm speaking in broad strokes, but are very florid and very pronounced. The grandparents who remember 67, the grandparents who remember and were alive during the Holocaust, and the grandchildren to whom that's 1,000 years ago in ancient history, and what about the babies in Hamas and in Gaza, and et cetera, et cetera. So to me, the resonance of this story is just how we like to sing L'Dor Vador from generation to generation. We all proclaim God's love. I mean, that's Elias's signature song. And when Elias and David sing that, who doesn't love that? But in real life, L'Dor Vador is really hard. And in terms of expulsions, I don't have what to add there, Tamar, other than to say, it's got to be very painful to be expelled. Yeah. Other reactions to this dialogue, and then I want to ask you how you put all this together before we close. Any other reactions to the middle chapters of the book? Alice Bressman.
I felt the grandfather's position reflected back on the letter from the professor from Hebrew University. He reflected the Netanyahu Melikowski kind to me position, that this is life, the reality of life. I'm not speaking necessarily of the militancy of it, but the experience of the Jew, the comparing the 1942 to
1492, yeah.
Yeah. So to me, that was like a continuity from the letter. There were a lot of things that were said that I've saved up kind of. The grandfather, grandchild. The grandchild's a teenager. Let's get real about teenagers. They kind of do their thing. Yes, there were family dynamics, but she was a teenager. But there were a few things that you mentioned. I don't recall why you mentioned Mitzrayim, but you did. Mm-hmm. Last week was Lech Lecha, and this week is welcoming strangers to your tent. There were no limits and boundaries kind of in this story amongst the family members. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe interprets Mitzrayim as part of setting limits and boundaries and finding yourself, which Lech Lecha. Many people interpret the concept of Lech Lecha is looking within and seeing who you are. And now this week you brought up accepting the stranger. In America today, it depends where you are if you accept the stranger. In the neighborhood we're in on the Cape, you say hello to everyone. And you chat with everyone as you walk the beach. And you wave, how are you? Hope you have a great day. But here in Boston, you don't. And growing up in New York in the 1950s, a lot of Israelis were seen as obnoxious. You accepted it, you overlooked it. And you went on to see what was more to them, what was within them, not their obnoxiousness. So in many ways, this is a period piece.
Yes.
Themes.
Yeah, it very much captures. It takes place in 1960. It has a mid 20th century feel to the book. The Mitzrayim, by the way, that Joshua Cohn brings up that's the voice of young Reuben Bloom's Hebrew school teachers who say, don't be seduced by America, that it promises to be a different kind of exception, but beneath it, it's just Mitzrayim. It's another dangerous place for Jews. That's Joshua Cohn's resonance of it. I'll tell you what I like about this book, and I am alive to the critique that Annette Needle brought up, which is it's very unflattering of the Netanyahus. I also want to name that Yoni Netanyahu is a fallen hero, and when you read at the end of the book, he especially does not come out well at the end of the book, and who knows if this whole story about there being Vildachayas is true or not true, and if it's satire, are they sliming an entire family? And so I think Annette's points are really valid. What I like about this book, though, and continue to like about the book, is I think it does raise like really important issues about our own lives. I mean, and in addition to the ones we've talked about before, about Jewish history, the nature of America, etc., I think it raises two issues for us in the middle chapters that are very important, which are how do we navigate differences in our own family among the generations? And that is, you have a violent expression here with the nose incident, but you have three generations who are just so like porcupines with each other. Walt and Sabine, and Henya and Alter, and Reuben and Edith and Judy, like, oi, this is not right. But the question is, and they're also different and they're also disconnected. And it makes me think about how do we connect with our generations. I will say, and I want to say, it's really hard. Like, the war happened in May. Shira and I are in a very different place on Israel than our kids. And, on the family threads, we're like, oh my God. So we made a decision that we were all going to come together for the summer. When I was turning 60, all my kids who live out of state were coming together. And we said, you know what, we're going to talk to our kids about Israel. We're going to have that heart-to-heart about Israel, and really talk to each other instead of sending these texts on the family thread. And when it came to be, we're all together, everyone said, let's not do this. It's just so unpleasant and it's unproductive. And what's going to be with it? So we just decided to live with our differences. So I want to say, I think, I'm alive to Annette's critique, and I don't love the burlesque, and I don't love the satire, and I worry about sliming Jews and Israelis. But when you peel beneath all that, the question that he raises is just, I think, super urgent about how do we navigate generational differences? Because it's not only in Reuben Bloom's family, his fictional family, it's in all of our families. If you're blessed to have children and grandchildren, And if you're blessed to have parents and grandparents, if you're blessed to be in a family where you have, let's say, 4 generations living, why don't you talk to them about Israel, and you'll see generational differences. And that's real. And I don't have the answer. I, for one, do not have the answer, but the problem is real. The other thing that I think is really interesting, the other substantive takeaway that I took from this chapter is how all the mitzvot that are bein adam lechavero, between people, like home hospitality, all are in need of refurbishment and rethinking in the age of COVID. Because this chapter 8 is about home hospitality, again, with all the burlesque and the extreme, but it's an ancient mitzvah. It's literally the first mitzvah in our portion this week, home hospitality. And it was always hard, but it's really hard now with COVID. And how does COVID affect all of those mitzvot? There's a death in the community, and I was talking to the spouse of the person who passed, and we're thinking about the funeral and being in a space where people can comfort her. And she says many of her good friends are not comfortable coming indoors, period. So we have to do everything outdoors. So I think that all the moves we Jews have to be with each other, to comfort each other, are just disrupted in ways that are going to reshape our lives. And we're just at the beginning of thinking about that, whether it's home hospitality or comforting a friend who's had a loss. So I think I say amen to Annette's caveats and concerns, but I continue to think that this book raises really important issues for our own lives. For next week, let's finish the book, including the curious end of the book. And we'll look forward to that. By the way, we're reading this book slowly. Thursday night, I'm doing a TE Reads for the whole congregation, including the many people who don't join our class. And if you want to join that to hear other people's views, that's Thursday night at 8. And otherwise, next week, we'll finish the book. And I'm so grateful for the conversation. Have a good week, guys.
Thank you, Wes.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.